All right, so let's talk about some methods of collecting quantitative data. Today, I'm going to mention three really primary, super common methods that social scientists use to collect quantitative data, numeric data. So, we're going to talk about surveying, experiments, and publicly available data sets. So, the one that you pick makes a big difference on the kinds of questions you can answer. So, let's walk through these one at a time. Let's suppose your research question is, how does remote work affect employee productivity? So we want to think about the ways in which remote work can impact productivity. How should we collect the best data? So let's break it down. So let's suppose we start with a survey. Now, we could use a survey to gather data directly from employees. So surveys are always a self-reported data kind of approach, which also means that people can lie to you, they can lie to themselves. But it is one of the great things about studying people is you can ask them questions directly. So you might ask questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how productive do you feel when working remotely? Or how many hours a week do you work remote versus in office? Right, so we can ask them specific questions. We're trying to get numeric answers out of them, either on scales, or they can pick categories. One of the benefits of surveys, they're super efficient. They're scalable. You can send them out digitally to hundreds or even thousands of people, so you can get a pretty big data set. But here's the catch with a survey. You can only establish correlations between variables, not direct causation. So just because remote workers might report higher productivity doesn't mean remote work causes productivity to increase. Other factors like personality or job type or the home office setup that could also be influencing the results. There's too many unknown variables in a survey that you can't control for. So while you can find trends and patterns and establish correlations or relationships between variables, you don't know for sure if one variable is actually causing the other variable to change. That's where experiments are handy. Often medical researchers, psychologists tend to use experiments. But to establish causation, you do need an experiment. So, for example, with our hypothetical research question about remote work, a company could randomly assign employees to work remotely or in office for, say, a period of time each, and then measure their productivity using performance metrics. Right. So by controlling for outside factors, you can determine if remote work truly boosts productivity. But the thing about experiments is they can be expensive, time consuming, and they may not always be feasible or even ethical. You can't always place people into these laboratory or very controlled conditional settings. And so often experiments just aren't possible. But when you are able to do them well, they do go a step beyond simple correlation and they establish causality. You can isolate variables and see if one is actually inducing a change in the other. Now, lastly, publicly available data sets. I highly recommend using these, especially for students who have to do like a senior capstone or thesis, where it's a lot quicker. You can get a pretty robust data set without collecting your own data. You often don't have to file with IRB because you're not actually interacting with human subjects. The data has already been collected. One of the resources I highly recommend is the General Social Survey, also known as the GSS. It's a great resource. It collects national data on a variety of topics, work conditions, job satisfaction, productivity measures related to our example, but all kinds of stuff, religion and political views and lots of demographic information. It's been going on since the 70s. They do it every other year, and you can download the direct data set, like literally a spreadsheet of the respondents' answers that you can then analyze for your own projects. But the government also has a lot of publicly available data, like the Department of Labor or the CDC or the Census, as well as just a variety of other nonprofits and research institutes. You can find publicly available data. The ICPSR is a great repository of publicly available data. When researchers finish a project, they'll often upload their raw data into this repository for others to be able to use. But the thing about using publicly available data is you can only answer questions that the data will allow you to answer. So if you're using a publicly available data set, you often need to see what data is available related to your topic of interest, then fashion the research question. Whereas if you're actually designing a survey or an experiment, you start with your research question, then you design the instruments to collect data to answer that question. So you have to sort of reverse engineer it if you're using publicly available data. You see what data is available, then you determine what questions that data can actually answer. So you're kind of working backwards in that sense. So what's the right method? It depends on your research goal. Use a survey when you want broad self-reported data, but you can only measure correlations. Choose an experiment when you need to prove cause and effect relationships, and leverage publicly available data like the GSS, but there's a lot of others, when you need large scale insights without the time or resources of going out and collecting new data. So by carefully selecting your method, you can come up with research that's valid, that's impactful, and that fits your budget and timeline as well. Thanks.